Good morning. Today on the PIO podcast, we'd like to introduce Amanda Schoepp. She's a digital content editor for the Hyatt Hotels Corporation. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So, Amanda, thank you very much for being on. I know you were a little nervous about coming on because this is not what you thought. It is not exactly in your wheelhouse, but I think it is exactly in your wheelhouse. So I'd like to talk about you first. Tell our listeners what a digital content editor does.
So I essentially, any website you peruse, any website you read, you're reading the copy, you're learning more about a company, a brand, whatever. My responsibility as a digital content editor, that's where the digital comes in, is to clean up that copy that you're seeing on websites. So I work for Hyatt Hotels Corporation. And so that is one of my main jobs, is making the copy on all of their hotel websites, for lack of a better term, a little sexier, a little cleaner, a little tighter. So that is, in a nutshell, what a digital content editor is.
Okay, so all law enforcement and most public information officers have the worst time dealing with content on their web pages because they're always outdated. The software is always very difficult to work with. When I left my last department, we had Civic Plus, which was not a bad platform to run a website on, but it still was very difficult to get it to look just the way you wanted. And then updating it was always a chore because it frequently was unavailable to be updated. So, and that's one of those things that I think a lot of public information officers struggle with because their pages are horribly updated, and just the word you use, sexier, they are not very sexy whatsoever.
No, I understand that. And so like with what we're doing right now is Hyatt recognized that its current like back end, website it was using wasn't great. The layout wasn't nice. It wasn't giving off, the vibes they wanted to give off. And so now they're moving all of their copy over to, we're just going to keep using the word, a sexier platform. And my job is to help make the copy as elevated as the new design is. So
Very
I do
cool.
understand, yeah, the outdatedness and that kind of thing. It resonates for sure.
And it also reflects on the organization too when things are outdated or inaccurate, and that's
Right.
a thing that so many of us struggle with because we're trying to get content updated, we're trying to get language updated, or even old stuff I've seen stuff decades old on
Yeah.
websites that just needs to be archived and put away.
Yeah. Yep. No, when I was a reporter, there was a lot of PIO sites, a lot of police department sites, fire department sites. They needed some love. Let's put it that way.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about your background. You brought up that you were a reporter before. So you had a pretty interesting career starting out as a general assignment reporter. How did you make that transition? First of all, talk about being the journalist that you were and then your transition.
Sure. I got lucky right when I got out of college. I landed a reporter role. I went to school for journalism and I was an editor all 4 years of my college paper. I mean, I like ate, slept, breathed journalism, and all I wanted was a reporter career when I got out. Funnily though, the job I got, it was indeed a general assignment reporter, but it was for a really small newspaper. So I live in St. Louis, but the paper is 2 hours away in this very rural community, which I was a fish out of water. But I got the job and I moved there 2 weeks after graduating, and I was a reporter for a little over 2 years at this paper. And I was like a dog with a bone. I worked probably 60, 70, sometimes 80-hour weeks. We only had one other reporter on staff. And I also was responsible for editing the entire paper.
Oh my goodness.
So we would put the paper out twice a week, and my editor came up to me one day and he said, you have a knack. He had this thick Southern accent. He said, you have a knack for editing, for copy editing. Can you just edit the whole paper every time we go to press? I was like, oh my God, sure.
Gosh.
So anyway, I got really good at editing. And so when I finally got out of journalism, which I did, I was a reporter in St. Louis for a little while after that. I did some freelance work for several different publications in the area. I finally got kind of burnt out. The money's not great. The hours are terrible. It's a lot of work. And so I wormed my way into, they call it getting into the dark side. You move from journalism to marketing. And so I did get into marketing, and I was able to find roles in marketing that still catered to my experience, which was my bread and butter, editing and writing, which is how I, over the last 13, 14 years, ended up working at agencies and with content and here as an editor.
Where did you go to school for your journalism degree?
I went to Webster University here in St. Louis.
Okay. Okay. I was
Yeah.
going to say, did you go to Mizzou? Because my daughter went to Mizzou. She was in the J school there.
It's a great school. I chose not to go to Mizzou because I knew I would party too much, and I knew this about myself. And I said, you know what? We'll just stay home. It was a good decision.
Interestingly enough, yeah, when you go to Mizzou and you look at the the pool at the school, and it's like set up like going to the Dells or something like that, like a part. I mean,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a great school though.
It is. It is. My daughter loved it, and she got a great job out of that experience that she had. So, all right. So let's talk about one of the reasons why I contact you. And I came across a lot of your posts that come up. You post a lot of stuff about AP style book, and the posts are related to that because obviously you like to make sure things that are grammatically correct and in the right style. Public information officers always rely on the APA style guide, but they're not necessarily journalists, and they don't do a very good job at it. So
Right.
based on your experience as an assignment reporter and an editor, what are the most common errors you see that public information officers make when they do a media release?
It took me a while to kind of cull some answers here because there's sort of a smattering of things, but more often than not, it's not really tied so much into AP style errors. It's more just like plain old grammatical errors. I made a list, but ones I see fairly often are using passive versus active voice, which is, very simply, I can give some examples like a passive sentence would be the scene was investigated by police, right? We're speaking in passive voice when what you want to do is whenever you can revert to active voice so that it's more engaging, more straightforward, more direct. So the sentence would change to police investigated the scene. Quicker, the information gets to faster. So passive versus active. Another one I see is comma splices. So that's when you're connecting, I'm going to nerd out here, two independent clauses with a comma. So basically you're connecting two sentences with a comma instead of just giving it a good old period. So an example would be, the company recently launched the product, comma, it was an immediate success. Those are two independent sentences. They deserve to be on their own. Stick a period there. I do occasionally see redundancies where it's easy to repeat ourselves in press releases, especially if we feel like it's information that really needs to be driven home. The way to drive it home is use that active voice, put it high up in your release, and be as direct as possible. There's no need to repeat. The only reason you would want to give any kind of repetition is if maybe it comes out of a direct quote. And then I think maybe the last couple was unnecessary modifiers. So when we talk in everyday language, we like to use words like very and, highly and things like that because it just sounds a little better. But usually, to use an editor term, you want to cut the fat. So for example, we are very pleased to announce. We're just pleased to announce. You can get that very out of there.
Right.
Another is highly successful. Just say successful. Get the highly out of there. It means the same thing. You're not adding anything. We can also be a little wordy. Something like, because of the fact that this business is going out of, style, you can just say because the business is going out. So like just learning to cut the fat where you can. And last but not least, this one's my favorite. I even made a little post-it, apostrophe misuse. So plural words and acronyms don't take apostrophes. There are some acronyms. It's probably backwards in the thing, but it's PIOs. There's no apostrophe. CEOs, no apostrophe. FAQs, no apostrophe. So those don't need them. I think that was it for those.
Awesome. I appreciate that. The one that always kills me is I see it a lot, and I was a big offender of this early on in my career, and I learned to get away with it, is the word fled. Police said the person fled from the scene. Well, what if they fled in? Or how did they fled? Why not just say if they ran away or they left in a car or
right, be more specific.
Saying they fled, how are what are you telling the public? We use that because I don't know, it's the way cops think, and that's a cop speak, and they fled the scene. Well, how did they do it?
That's a good point. Is being as specific and detailed as possible is, especially in a release, that's a really key point. That's a good thing to bring up.
I got a book that I wanted to bring up. It's from a journalist named Jeff Butera. It's Write Like You Talk. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a really short book. It's like literally like 150 pages, but he literally goes through all the things that journalists should start writing like, and this is exactly what he says PIOs need to write like, same way. Just write like you talk and you'll be much better off.
It's true. It's true. I think we have a tendency to want to get very superfluous and flowery when we're writing, and it's not necessary. You cut the fat as often as you can. Get straight to the point.
Absolutely. So one of the other things that you see a lot of people you make mistakes with are hyphens. And I know you've talked about this in the past too, is things like Asian hyphen American, which is incorrect. Why do PIOs use it in error so much, or generally do we use it in error?
Sure. AP style calls for no hyphen. So Asian American, African American, Pacific Islander American, you're never going to put a hyphen in there. I think I think we want to put a hyphen because we're seeing it's two things that feel like it belongs to one entity because it does, right? You know, we're describing two things about the same person, so it feels like it should be together, it should be conjoined. But in fact, it is open. That's the term we use, no hyphen. So even if you're saying an Asian American man died yesterday on the subway, and it's you're using it as a modifier to describe another person, it's always going to stay open. You never need a hyphen for those.
It's amazing how much, after I read some of these now, after having a lot more experience in this, I've been doing this now almost 20 years, and you see the mistakes that still come out. You go, oh my God, why? On this date and time, it's like, oh my
Right,
God,
right.
yes, it's
Yeah.
already on there. The date and time's already there. But yeah, okay.
I think people get, yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I think people get married to certain phrases and words, and then it's hard to let go. We have a connection with language, which is strange. It's almost an emotional connection, and it is a little hard to let go of the things you use and the
I
things
think
that you believe. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and part of it is the older PIOs or PIOs that came up through the ranks without a journalism background. They write like they write their reports. So the reports all started out with, on this date and time, this was reported, and they went into their narrative, and that's the same way it got carried over to when they started writing their press releases, until they learned how to write them in a more succinct, clearer way. Because police reports, let's face it, they're extremely detailed sometimes, and they have to be. A press release does not need to be. Nobody wants to read a 5-page press release ever.
Right,
You know.
right. And I remember when I used to have to interview, one of my beats was police and fire, and I used to have to interview them almost every day. And I noticed even when they spoke like they wrote their police reports. And I thought it was fascinating. I mean, that is so ingrained in them at that point that, of course,
Yes.
the way they're going to write is going to come out that way too. And so usually my rule of thumb is like it's the same in journalism to try and to access as you can, as best you can, the inverted pyramid, which is just an upside down pyramid, and the most important at the top, and then the least important stuff goes further and further and further down. So like the thing that's most, and it forces you to be more succinct, like most important to least important. Remove the detail, cut the fat, and just tell it like it is.
Yep. So, Amy, I saw that in your previous backgrounds, you have both content marketing and digital marketing in your background. How does each function?
Sure. So content marketing, this one was one of my longer editing jobs that I had, but essentially content marketing is, let's say you have a client who's really big into finance and he's got a great company, but he's not able to market himself very well. So he comes to this content marketing agency, and what we do, this sort of service we offer, is we start interviewing him, and we call all the information out of him about finance. What does he know? What's his expertise? What's he good at? What can he provide? And then we literally write it in article form, and we start pitching the article to different publications where it makes sense, and he's going to start getting published in those articles. And so all of a sudden his expertise is on display. And so instead of it being advertising or like big pop-up ads that show up on your screen, the way he's marketing himself is through articles that highlight his expertise, that suddenly when you read it you feel like you're in good hands with him as your financial person. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So that's content marketing. So I was an editor in that arena for 5 years. And so my job was to make his and any other clients' content really shine and also fit the publication that we were trying to send it to. And then digital marketing is more traditional. It's basically just like Mad Men marketing from the 60s, but online. So we're talking, crafting web copy, email copy, social media copy, which is what so much of us are doing these days. So those are the differences between the two.
And I could see where content marketing has a place in law enforcement and is what PIOs do, because we want to tell stories about our agency. So there's ways that you could use content marketing to do that and tell
Totally.
stories about our staff.
Yeah.
And I think they forget that this is an area I think a lot of public information officers struggle with is that end of the spectrum for our field.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. There's probably a lot of room for exploration there and like really selling what they do, how they do it, and why they're so good at what they do. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think.
there's the Indianapolis Police Department. They've got a communications director there. She's phenomenal, and she's got an amazing series that she's doing right now where she's talking about different members of the department, and it's a whole starts from when they before they even got in the department.
I
And then
love
it
it.
goes right all the way through it. And she's doing an amazing job with it. And every time I see something new, I'm like, wow, she's telling the story from the inside out. And it's just makes you like connect with those people much more.
It's That's the biggest part is suddenly when you're reading about another person, it's not just about their expertise, but why they love what they do and why they're doing it at all. And then all of a sudden that connection just sort of makes everything fall into place and you're suddenly more interested than you may have been.
Yeah. And that's, and especially in law enforcement, because connecting and being connected to the community, depending on the type of community that you're in, it's very difficult. The negative. I always say this, when I used to teach classes for the community, I would say, look at a fire truck go by. What do you think? And they're like, oh, they're going to help somebody. And when you see a squad car go by, what do you think? They're going to arrest somebody. So we're automatically negative before we even get to the scene, even though we could both be going to do the same thing.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. Yeah. So there's ways to market yourself in different ways to like remove that stigma, remove that negativity. And yeah, content marketing is definitely a way to do that.
And is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered?
Actually, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of good ground.
Yeah, no, we have definitely. All right, so let's lighten it up. Let's go to some rapid fire questions.
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Texting or talking?
Talking.
Movies or books?
Books.
Coffee, tea, or energy drink?
Energy drink. I don't drink caffeine, but I guess energy drink.
Adult drink of choice?
I don't drink.
Very good. Cats or dogs?
Cats. I have always had cats.
What's your favorite go-to karaoke song?
Friends in Low Places by Garth Brooks.
That is a common one. Oh yeah, absolutely. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
I think probably teleportation, mostly because I can't stand traffic. Literally have like dreams when I'm stuck in non-moving traffic of just being able to like lift up and leave out of it. That's my reasoning. It's not
That's
it's
nice.
not
That's a cool one. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good one. If you could instantly become an expert in one thing, what would it be?
This is gonna seem maybe a little off the wall. Documentary filmmaking is one. I have a huge love for documentaries, favorite genre, and it's almost all I watch. So I would be super intrigued to learn all the ins and outs and like figure out how to be an expert at it.
Nice. What place would you most like to travel to?
We have this real deep love affair with the Mediterranean. Something is just calling me there. I want to go to like Santorini, Greece. That's kind of
Yeah, yeah.
I'm really
Beautiful.
interested. Yeah.
Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
Beg for forgiveness.
What's your favorite way to relax after a long day?
It usually I like to take a long walk through the neighborhood and then I'll come back and read.
Very cool. If you could choose to sit down and have an energy drink with any historical figure, alive or dead, who would it be?
I love that you included energy drink. I'm gonna sound like an old lady here. It would be either FDR or Winston Churchill. I have a kind of an obsession with World War II, and I would just love to pick their brains.
Several years ago, my kids and I and my wife, we went to Washington, D.C., and we went through the FDR memorial there. And I learned so much about that. And what an interesting person and what he did for the country in regards to providing support for people. And I did not realize that back then, or even didn't know that for years, and found out going to see the memorial. So just amazing So I don't think you're an old lady at all. I think that was intriguing, and it really, I really learned something with that, and what a great person he was.
He was a pivotal president, very much.
Yep.
Yeah, very much.
All right, Amanda, final thoughts. What key points would you like the listeners to take from today's interview?
I think that something to consider, if I had to, you and I were talking about why I felt like this wasn't immediately in my wheelhouse, is like, I'm an editor. How do I fit into, to the PIO landscape, whatever. But really, I think when I really think about it from a sort of a bird's eye view, because there's so much content, fake news, things floating around the world these days, I think it's so important that we work toward having as much credibility in what we write as possible, especially in press releases for PIO, things like that. And that's not just like fact checking, that's a huge part of it, right? But the other part of it is making sure your copy is as clean and crisp and to the point as you can make it, because whether people believe it or not, subconsciously, you'll have more credibility just by having really clean writing. So it's that two-pronged, make sure you're presenting real facts, make sure you're checking your facts, and make sure your copy is just super succinct and clean. I promise it will lead to greater credibility. And I think that is a thing that I should have driven home earlier, but that's a big thing.
No, that's a great way to sum it up. I appreciate that. As we wrap up, is there a piece of wisdom or a motto that you live by?
One of my favorite books, which I think was turned into a movie with Reese Witherspoon, but the book is Wild. And the author is Cheryl Strayed. It's a single line. It's the very last sentence of the whole book. And it's how wild it was to let it be. I have a really hard time not being like a total control freak about everything. Hello, I'm an editor for a living. And so the idea of just letting things be and letting it go is a hard concept for me, and dare I say a wild concept. So I try daily to think about how wild it might be, Amanda, just to let it go, let it be. So that's the line out of the book.
Outstanding. How could people best reach you if they want to connect or follow up?
Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn under Amanda Schoepp. It's a hard last name to spell. It's Schoepp, but it sounds like Shepherd, beginning of Shep. So that's the best place to find me. I also have an online portfolio, amandaschoepp.com.
And I will add all that into the show notes. Amanda, thank you for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was a pleasure having you. Thank you.